Hello, everyone. It's really a pleasure and a privilege to be here with you today to join the 2021 CARE Conference, Accounting for Sustainability and Responsible Investing. My name is Ioannou, and I'm an Associate Professor of Strategy and Entrepreneurship at the London Business School. First of all, allow me to thank the organizers for inviting me to give this talk and share with you some of my work in the broader sustainability space. Now, let's start with the basics. I think that most, if not all, companies around the world are facing demands and expectations for a new model of corporate leadership, to be more environmentally responsible, to act in more ethical ways, and to really account for the social context in which they operate. Now, in recent years, those demands and expectations have aggregated up to really an unprecedented amount of pressures on companies. The world essentially is demanding that companies be part of the solution rather than being part of the problem to the world's most acute existential challenges in the form of environmental and social problems. And where do those pressures come from? Well, just think about it. Regulators, increasing regulation, especially around environmental issues. Think about the plastic crisis and so on. It also comes from a generational shift. Younger generations, millennials, Gen Zs, are pushing companies to be more responsible, not only through their purchasing decisions, but through their career decisions, by choosing to work for companies that are more environmentally and socially responsible. And even in recent years, we also see and we expect to see going forward, the intergenerational transfer of wealth, which means new generations are also going to be demanding the integration of sustainability as investors, as people that have savings, as people that are building up pensions. Now, in addition to, of course, the generational shift and the regulatory, we also see the financial community really waking up not only to ESG and sustainability as risks, but also as growth opportunities, while at the same time, civil society and civil activism is increasing and complexifying. That's why we see now, for instance, NGOs acquiring shares and showing up at AGMs and submitting shareholder resolutions and so on. So all of these multidimensional pressures on businesses are creating what I mentioned at the beginning, the demands for this new model of corporate leadership. That's what I study in my work as a strategy scholar. I would like to understand why and how is it that companies integrate sustainability into the core of their business and why that matters. So here's my sort of conclusion for the last 12 or so years that I'm in this profession and studying this field. I think that unequivocally, sustainability is a disruption. And it's a type of disruption that companies have not seen before in living memory. Why is that the case? Because most companies lack the resources, the knowledge, and the capabilities that they need in order to address the environmental and social issues that are facing and that are being pressured to address. Now, as a strategy scholar, though, I also care profoundly about this idea of how do companies thrive? What does it mean for companies to build a competitive advantage? So when we talk about competitive advantage, what do we care about? We care about the inputs. In other words, how do we manage in order to achieve a competitive advantage? And the outputs. What is it that we manage? What is it that we're trying to achieve through the competitive advantage? Now, as you can imagine, once we introduce into that equation this very important idea of sustainability, then both the inputs as well as the outputs of that process change. And that's what my research has focused on today. Now, let's focus first on the inputs. How do we manage? Well, I would argue that to date, not only managers, but also scholars focused a lot on this economic context, on the narrow and narrowly defined and sometimes short-sighted economic context. How do we manage? How do we strategically manage within that economic context? But sustainability comes in and say, well, you cannot only narrowly focus on the economic context. You really need to take into account the social and environmental context in which companies operate. So in that respect, my work to date has looked at the role of national level institutions in terms of pushing companies to integrate those contexts in their managing, but also going below the level of institutions, things like regulations, but even personal motivations for companies to integrate sustainability into the way they do business. So taken together, I think that that work kind of highlights that over and above the economic context, we need to understand what the inputs of the new process, of the new model of corporate leadership, the idea of managing in the social and environmental context. Now, on the output side as well, as scholars, we have focused on financial performance, on the profitability of a company, not only as strategy scholars, of course, also as accounting and finance scholars, right? That's a whole kind of idea behind finance, and also the whole idea behind on accounting. What is it that we should be reporting, and the idea of financial materiality of the data that we are reporting. However, that's only, again, a partial story, because clearly, in addition to the financial performance, companies have an impact on the social and environmental domain. They have, and unfortunately, and for a long period of time, those impacts have been negative. So now, with the pressures on companies about sustainability, we are rethinking the outputs. We are rethinking the performance and what it means for a company to create value. And we're moving beyond the idea of financial performance, not to replace, but rather to complexify our understanding of performance by adding to the equation environmental and social issues. And we're not doing that in a simplistic, additive way. Clearly, there are strong interdependencies between financial as well as environmental and social performance. And in a lot of my work, I try to understand what is the impact on companies' social performance more broadly, as well as financial performance, when they decide to integrate sustainability into the way they do business. So again, going back to where I started, the idea that my main argument here is that the integration of sustainability into the way we do business fundamentally changes the equation of what it means to behave strategically. And in so doing, if you think about it, changing both the inputs and the outputs, it sort of redefines the role of the corporation in society, because suddenly now the corporation is not only about producing financial value, but it's about finding societal needs, gaps in the market. Think about, carbon capture technologies, plant-based diet, and so on, electric vehicles. All of those solutions to society's existential problems, whereby companies bring up their innovation and their scaling up capability in order to find those solutions and then scale them up efficiently and effectively. This is the kind of contribution, in my humble opinion, that we need from companies in order to reach a sustainable future. However, we're only at the beginning of that process. The field of sustainability, academically speaking, is still nascent. There's a lot more that we do not know. For instance, we studied a lot public markets, but there's also private markets and there's venture capital. Remember, whenever there's a disruption, existing players are going to try to adapt, but a lot of innovation and a lot of the new products and services are going to come from new ventures. That's why the whole universe of venture capital is now talking about integration of sustainability into the venture capital business model. Huge question still remains open. Second question, the role of financial markets. Again, a domain that I have done a lot of work in, highlighting that it is also the world of finance that is changing its purpose. It's changing its purpose towards being better stewards of capital, because these companies, in order to grow and provide sustainable solutions, they need to be identified and be funded by the market. Hence, the attention of the asset managers and asset owners in recent years. That brings me, of course, to the big issue, which is how do we measure sustainability so that these asset managers can do a more efficient and better allocation of capital? Well, here we have the whole challenge of understanding, integrating ESG metrics, making them compatible, and potentially making mandatory the disclosures that would allow us to compare and contrast companies. So for all of these reasons, these are only a few of the white spaces or huge areas that still remain unexplored. I do think sustainability, it's a very, very exciting space for new scholars and a very exciting space for managers, because they scope for experimentation, but for a good cause, so that we can jointly, as institutions of business, as institutions of academia, come together and contribute towards building a more sustainable and a more inclusive future. So thank you so much for your attention today, and I look forward to hearing your questions.